Hello everybody.
Welcome to the third video in the series on Les Revenants, and in particular representation for the 2022 exam series for Eduqas A-Level. Like we've been told, the focus is going to be on representation, and so this video is going to focus on the representation of age.
One of our key points we have to consider is our representation theorist, Stuart Hall. Right, Stuart Hall believed that representation is the process by which members of a culture use language to produce meaning. All right, and he says that these producers will produce this meaning, and they do this through the organisation of signs which we use to understand and describe the world we live in. And then we place these into a wider set of values and ideologies. However, he's very vocal in the fact that these are not fixed. These chop and change with time. They vary from where you are, who you are, what your background is, and they are defined by the society. But they are definitely not a fixed notion. He further states that for stereotypes to be understood, we, the audience, need to have this shared conceptual roadmap in order to make sense of these mediated signs and subsequent stereotypes. If we're not aligned with the producer, if we come from maybe a different background, we aren't exposed to what everybody else is exposed to, it's a case of we won't recognise these stereotypes. I mean, not every single culture and background will perceive that someone who's wearing glasses within a group of people is necessarily the geek, for example. So it's a case of just taking a step back and going, what is the producer expecting us to see from this? And we might not get it, depending on what's being shown to us, but usually the producer's producing a text within an environment that they're aware of and that they presume will be recognised by the audience.
We're going to go in chronological order, and we're going to focus firstly on our young characters. And our first young character is Victor. Victor is portrayed as in two ways. So we can either take him as a stereotypical child, or we can take him as a stereotypical horror child, and they are two very different characters. So stereotypical child representation is when he's first at Julie's flat. He knocks on the door. She has a little bit of questions. She's trying to figure out who he is. And while Julie's not having any success, the neighbour from behind or from across the way opens the door and says, "Oh, who have we got here?" And Victor, not really knowing what to make of the neighbour, goes and stands side by Julie and goes to hold her hand. And it's this close-up of the hand holding, the reaching for this protection. It's this safety. It portrays our characters being quite vulnerable and exposed and needing to basically be looked after. The second image is where we are presented with this gorgeous long shot. Now the long shot is also a deep shot, so we're able to see the bus coming from around the bend. But we are also able to see Victor stood in the middle of the road, and he's very much vulnerable. He is obviously in danger, and it's this peril that he's facing that we then think, oh my God, the child's going to be hit, and setting him up to be almost not quite the victim just yet, but that he's at risk. And as a child, we want to try and protect our children. Victor could also be suggested to be that creepy, stereotypical horror child, purely because he is deliberately standing in the way of that bus. He knows what he's doing, and he is deliberately making that bus veer off course, thus portraying him to be quite evil and quite creepy. Moving on, because Victor is presented in four. So interesting, kind of within this, again, stereotypical. Children like to draw. It's a fact. Stereotypical horror child. The drawings are quite gruesome, quite sorry if you haven't watched the whole series. Later on, it's kind of revealed that Victor, he sees the future, and this is part of, I want to say, a master plan. He knows what he's doing. All right, and his drawings are a way of releasing what he knows awaits everybody. All right, so Again, stereotypical child moment, yet conversely, the drawings suggest more like a horror child. And the horror child is reinforced through the scene when, in episode 2, Julie's neighbour alludes to the fact quite openly that she doesn't understand why Julie has a child in her flat and suggests that she's going to report Julie and Victor to the relevant authorities. Victor obviously hears this and he waits for Julie to leave, and then he goes across to the neighbour's flat. Now, he knocks on the door, she opens the door and she allows him in, saying, and I've screenshotted the dialogue so that you can see it, she says, "I'm going to make you something, what would you like to eat?" Again, the woman is looking after the child and the child needs looking after. But at that same time, horror child stereotype alert, you've got that leitmotif that is symbolising, hold on, he's not over there for being nice and kind. He's there to do something a little bit unsettling. And then right at the end of episode 2, we're presented with this scene, bottom right hand corner. I don't know if you can make out the fact that there are 3 cats. You've got the ginger cat by the neighbour's feet, and then you've got 2 other cats, one grey and one tabby, that are sort of like on top of the neighbour's body. All we can see is like this pile of bread and it's dripped into the carpet, but the cats are eating basically the neighbour. Alright, so what has Victor done? The last time we saw the neighbour, she was closing the door as that creepy music, that non-diegetic sound was being played. And then the next time we see her, we've got this slow panning shot to reveal and bring up or go up across the neighbour's body, and we are revealed that actually Victor's been a bit sinister. Stereotypical horror child expectation. We're going to move in, or we're going to move on to other children. We're going to focus on the younger teenage aspect. So we've got Camille, and at this stage we think she's about 14. Alright, so she's 14 years old. She's returned from her bus trip. She doesn't realise that she is returned just yet. But she walks into the house, she's starving, she needs some food, and this is a repeating thing throughout Les Revenants. Instead of zombies eating brains, they just eat ordinary food. We see Victor eating the rice, we see Madame Costa eating in the cafe when Simon appears in episode 2, and it's just this continual eating. Oh, and Madame Costa is eating when we see her the first time at Mr. Costa's house. But Camille opens the fridge, makes herself a sandwich, and lo and behold, she says that thing that we all know teenagers say. That one phrase that teenagers across the world will use all the time: "I'll clean up later." Stereotype alert. Alright, so Stuart Hall would basically say, shared conceptual roadmap, we see this. Alright, and so she is presented as a stereotypical teen. Our next characters are 14-year-old Lena and 14-year-old Frederick. Now, the only time we see these two is at the end of episode 1, and it's only briefly, it's in 4 years previously seen. And Camille's gone to school, she's gone on to the school trip. Lena has skipped. Rebellious teenager, quite possibly. Frederick being almost like a skater boy, with his sort of like beanie hat on and his hoodies, and he looks very much kind of like a stereotypical 14-15-year-old. And so they are skipping school to, as we see later, to go and have sex, and it's just this rebel element and yet sexual experimentation element, and it's this sort of like period of time in their lives which is being stereotyped. Then we kind of progress in terms of our age. We move up towards Lena when she's 18 years old, or 18, 19. We think she's going to be 18. It's 4 years later. So as of 18-year-old, Lena is shown in the pub. So in terms of mise en scène, the setting, she's shown to be drinking. Alright, so the prop of the beer. And then later on the shots, very stereotypical of an 18-year-old to be drinking quite a lot as well, again stereotypical. And it's the scene when she receives a phone call, or Frederick receives a phone call on his phone, and he says, "It's your mum. Do you want to speak to her?" Now she doesn't know it's actually Camille that's ringing. She doesn't know that Camille's returned. So she believes it to be her mum. And does she want to answer the call? Again, look at the dialogue. No, she's a pain in the arse. As again, we hear, or we can kind of like picture ourselves. I mean, you guys are teenagers. How many of you said something about your parents being a pain in the arse? This is a very stereotypical viewpoint, and again, it's something that's worth being able to talk about through that dialogue, through that setting, and through the mise en scène, the props. All right, and the attitude as well is something that's quite easy to talk about in terms of that stereotype. Now, Frederick, as an 18 or 19-year-old, he is a little less stereotypical. He's actually quite mature. So Lena's had shot after shot. She's been challenged. She's basically said, "No, I'll drink. Don't. I'm just going for a wee. I'm not giving up yet. I'll be back for more," kind of thing. And Frederick he's observing this, and it's when she starts to get a little bit flirty with Simon at the bar. And again, is that a stereotypical 18-year-old thing to do? Quite possibly, to go out, start flirting. But Frederick sees this, and it might suggest something about his possessiveness, representation of masculinity. However, it could be that actually he's quite mature. He's seen his friend have a lot to drink, and he's just looking out for her. And then we've got Mr. Costa. Now, Mr. Costa, the first time he's presented to us is when Julie answers the phone, and she's talking to Mr. Costa, and that he needs his jab. So we know Mr. Costa is medically vulnerable, right? So she goes round and sorts him out, and we see her like administer, or at the end of administering the injection, and he seems a little bit on edge and unsettled, and he seems a little bit frail. Now we hear clattering in his apartment, and Julie doesn't really investigate. She questions it, but she doesn't go off to investigate it. Mr. Costa says, no, everything's fine, and like he's got it. So he's in control. But later on, when he is putting out all the pictures, and he's spraying the petrol or the accelerant over the images, we see him try to strike a match, and he does it, and there's a little bit of a tremble to his hands. We know he's medically vulnerable. Older people do stereotypically get the shakes, so it could be seen to be a little bit of a stereotype. Yeah, you're going to shake while trying to light the match. It could be that he's just scared of his returned wife. And it's not until we then get positioned, or we are positioned from the down worker's perspective through this lovely POV shot of the binoculars. You can see how it's been edited to make it look like through the binoculars lenses. And Mr. Costa is seen, it's that low angle, we're looking down on him from the perspective of the dam workers as he then jumps off the dam. Now, we know that he's medically weak, we know that he might be physically weak, and now this kind of suggests that he is mentally weak. Older people jumping off dams, it kind of suggests maybe this mental instability that he might have. So it just shows, again, relying on stereotypes, physically unable, mentally unable, and relying on representing them quite quickly to the audience. So that's representation of age. It's only short. You are only going to be expected to talk about groups. If you get a question like that where you can throw in age. Obviously, if you get a question along the lines of representation of gender, you do not talk about age. All right, talk about gender. But this might be useful for groups, just to widen the category, or to widen what you can talk about. So it hopefully has been useful. If it has been useful, please watch my other videos in the series. And thank you, and good luck for your exam on the 8th of June. I hope it goes well for you all.